So we're back with Lou May, and we're talking about what it was like to be a person of color in Marblehead back in the 16th and 17th centuries. And this is sort of an ongoing little conversation we're having. And I think now we're going to talk about abolitionists in Marblehead and any prominent abolitionists we had. And I think Lou's got a couple of stories to tell us.
Yeah. And for this, I am going to name a friend and partner, Jenny Van Ruden, who was the source of what I'm going to tell you, which I find fascinating. So this is an article from Marblehead Messenger, the edition of March 25th, 1904. It was written by a local person, Stephen Hathaway, who was born in 1829 and therefore was a young man during all the time leading up to the Civil War. So in this edition of the Marblehead Messenger, and people hopefully know that you can, on the Abbott Library site, get a link that gives you Marblehead Messenger editions in full from 1871 well into the 20th century.
Wow.
So here is a fascinating story from, although Mr. Hathaway doesn't give the exact timing of what he's talking about, it's got to be in the he's born in 1829, so you got to figure this is 1840s or so. Here I go with an excerpt. In those early days, there were but few abolitionists in town, and they were of the Garrison type, who believed that the Constitution guaranteed slavery, and therefore called the Constitution a quote unquote compact with hell that should be broken at all costs. These men were outside of all parties and almost outside of society. They would not vote and were regarded as infidels in religion because they said that if the Bible sustained slavery, as the churches told them, they had no use for it. One of the questions used argumentatively against them was, do you want your daughter to marry a Negro? Which they would have had to move away from Marblehead to accomplish, as there was not a marriageable Negro in the place. But as the years came and passed, the anti-slavery sentiment grew among those who were not in favor of destroying the Union, but who wished to confine slavery to the locality where it already existed and to stop it from spreading, which in its early period was not thought of. But the feeling towards abolitionists was intense. Thompson, the English agitator, was mobbed in the Methodist Church and sought safety in the home of Mr. Ware at the Farms. It was sometime after this that anti-slavery meetings were held in town. Among the first visitors was Wendell Phillips, and as no hall could be obtained, he spoke on Fort Sewell one Sunday afternoon. He was then living at Nahan, and a friend of the cause hired a conveyance and drove him over to Marblehead. On arrival, they stepped out of the carriage, Mr. Phillips going ahead to the fort, his friend stopping to hitch the horse to a post at the entrance of the fish fence. There he was met by the owner, who told him he could not hitch any. And here we see the 1904 equivalent for a curse word of the characters that get put even in Carter. So There's a curse word there, abolitionist horse there. When informed that it was a hired horse whose owner lived in Marblehead, the fish flake man said it made no difference. The animal had brought the king of anti-slavery to town, and that was enough to condemn him.
So people really held the fact that slavery was something they wanted to do so broadly dear that the few people who were willing to speak against it were really ostracized to some degree.
In this era, in
those days.
This is what Mr. Stephen is saying, Hathaway. And And this is the view held by a number of historians, although we sure can provide quite a bit of activity, and we will get to that in another segment, of very kind of valiant efforts. But let me continue now from this story because it's so apropos to 2021.
Yeah.
Listen to another paragraph. When one thinks of the scorn and invective used toward everyone who did not agree with the majority or thought differently on the slightest degree, the wonder is that so many anti slavery orators escape injury. Um, and I'll skip and then continue. They were always ready for a fight, the people who oppose things.
Yeah.
And the youngsters knew there was fun in the air when the abolitionists were coming. One time, the Anti Slavery Society voted to hold 100 meetings in this and neighboring counties. Our town was selected as one of the places. Meetings to continue for a week. Um, the great troubling wait uh, to obtain a church for this to happen occurred. After some trouble, the one of the Universalist Church was obtained uh, during afternoons and evenings for a week. Upon the first night, the play began. Among the delegates were Frederick Douglass, Reverend Pillsbury, James Buffum, and Henry Clapp, the latter of whom employed some of his time in rattling a pair of slaves' manacles, which he said had been used to confine a slave who had tried to escape from bondage. In short time, the speaker had wrought the audience to fever heat, so great that the meeting was broken up in confusion. As Buffum came down the aisle, a lady standing at the head of one of the pews said, "You deserve a coat of tar and feathers." So I'll stop there. Regret that I had to have some pauses there. I'm reading off of this 1904 typeface.
Yeah.
And with my vision, it's not that easy. So pardon that, but hopefully the story came through as something pretty fascinating from Stephen Hathaway.
Well, and it makes you wonder about how history sort of comes full circle and the level of discourse that we're having here in 2021.
Absolutely, no doubt about it, Bob. That's
You
well
can't
said.
help but draw connections. Topics obviously very different, but yet it's amazing how
Ideas,
history just
kind
keeps
of
coming around.
expressions. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating, Lou. And once again, we hope some of this has whetted your appetite to be interested enough to go and find out a little bit more about what it was like to be an abolitionist back in the 17th and 18th centuries in Marblehead, and the colonies. And maybe you'll do a little more research to find that out. So thanks, Lou.